Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this week's episode is brought to you by my new online course, Become a Superhuman. And yes, it sounds exactly like the title of the podcast, but this is actually an online course where we go into the various aspects of improving your health, specifically your endocrine health. More specifically, getting your testosterone up to the optimal levels. Now, whether you're a male or a female, as we've learned in numerous episodes of the show, testosterone is the ultimate feel-good motivation, improved health, improved fitness, improved body composition, super drug. Okay, so everything from your mood to your recovery time and everything in between is affected by your body's endocrine health. And what my team and I have done is we've actually taken years of my own self-experimentation, years of research, every possible literature and study we could find, and we've condensed it into a simple 3 to 4 hour program that you can follow along and make simple, safe, and easy adjustments to your lifestyle to improve your endocrine health. Now, as listeners of this podcast, you can get a very special discount by visiting jle.vi/T. That's jle.vi, just like my name, /T for testosterone. This episode is brought to you by Organifi. You know, the one thing that literally every single diet and nutrition expert that we've had on the show seems to agree on is that we need to eat more veg and get our greens and consume all natural products. But let's be honest, how many of us actually have the time? Well, recently I had the opportunity to meet some of the folks over at Organifi, and I've been absolutely blown away by them and their product. You see, Organifi is an organic superfood green juice powder that literally covers all your nutritional bases without having to eat 5 bowls of kale. It saves you loads of time, loads of money, and a lot of chewing. And really all you have to do is add water and drink it. So to check it out and save an incredible 20% off your first order, visit Organifi.com. That's ORGANIFI.com and use coupon code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. You guys, this week we are joined by a past guest and a best-selling author named Dr. William Davis, whose latest book, Undoctored, takes a critical look into the medical system, the healthcare system that has been in the news so much lately, and really looking into how it's failed us and how we can all become more informed about our own health. You probably know Dr. Davis from his previous book, Wheat Belly, from his own popular episode on this show, or from his blog, Facebook groups, and so on. So in this episode, guys, we talk about, obviously, healthcare, and we figure out why it isn't serving so many people. We also start to understand how you can flip the script on that conversation that you have with your doctor. So Dr. Davis really shares how you can take charge of your health and what you can do to improve it, and much, much more. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So without any further ado, I'm happy to present to you Dr. William Davis. Dr. William Davis, welcome back to the show, my friend. How have you been?
Terrific. How about you, Jonathan?
Oh man, really, really good. Really, really good. Our last episode together was really fantastic, and we've just been having a crazy year full of really phenomenal guests. So we're really excited to have you back on the show.
Excellent.
So what's been new? I understand that you've been working on a new book. Tell me a little bit about the journey since 2011, what you've been working on, and why write another book? The first book was so good. Why do you have to write another one?
Well, thank you. Well, as you recall, Jonathan, I started out in the original Wheat Belly book by indicting modern high-yield semi-dwarf wheat, this creation of agribusiness that corrupted the traditional plant. But it became clear, and people got astounding, impressive health results just by eliminating all wheat products. But it became clear that there are so many shared characteristics among all seeds of grasses that is grains, that's what grains are. That complete grain elimination took you even further. What became even clearer after that was if you correct all the nutritional deficiencies that persist even after you eliminate grains. In other words, we're often told that grains are filled with nutrition. Well, that's not true. Actually, grains cause numerous nutritional deficiencies. Most notably, for instance, iron and magnesium deficiency, because the phytates of grains, this component called phytates, are very powerful at blocking all absorption of minerals. So we had to correct those mineral deficiencies. And then there's some other common deficiencies that we can't blame on grains, like iodine deficiency, which is becoming rampant in the U.S., omega-3 fatty acid deficiency. What became clear is if you did all those things that I began talking about in more detail in the Wheat Belly Total Health book and more recently in other conversations, it became clear that you could reverse literally hundreds of health conditions and lose weight by doing this. But here's the story that really caught my attention, Jonathan. That is, people would come to me and they'd say to me, I want to do this program because my friend did it, my neighbor did it, my husband did, whatever. They had spectacular results. They're off 10 medications. They lost 83 pounds in a year. They're no longer type 2 diabetic. They don't have acid reflux, joint pain. Their hip pain is now gone. Their skin rash, eczema, psoriasis is now gone. Their migraine headaches are gone. They look better. They look 10 to 20 years younger. And I did it. And I had the same kind of results. And my doctor said it was stupid, that I shouldn't do it. What I was starting to see happen on a huge scale was that people were becoming healthy and slender and younger appearing despite their doctors. So that's when it became clear to me that health was no longer coming from the doctor. Perhaps it never did.
Wow.
But it's really coming from individual effort, individual insight and effort. So I think what we have is the means for individuals, the public, to regain health on an extraordinary scale, far better than your doctor could ever achieve with the tools he has in hand. Because as you know, the doctors don't use health. They don't use correction of nutritional deficiencies. They don't counsel you on sleep and picking good food. They counsel you on nonsense, like, do you need a statin drug for your high cholesterol?
Right.
Do you need an annual colonoscopy for your colon cancer? Do you need IBS drugs for your constipation and diarrhea for your irritable bowel syndrome? That's what they're interested in. They're interested in more MRIs, neurology consultations, heart catheterizations, because those doctors are all profiting. Like a larger end of quarter bonus from their hospital system, the more revenues they raise. And that's true, by the way. It's very true nowadays. And so what we have now is this misalignment of interests. You and I are interested in health. Doctors in the healthcare system are interested in money, in revenues. And the two often don't intersect. And so that's become my mission now, to help, just as you are, help educate people that there's an amazing amount of stuff you can do on your own, and you can achieve results that are superior to what your doctor achieved. This is the process I call Undoctored.
Wow. Okay. So I want to go a little bit deeper before we get into that. I want to kind of go into, I think we all kind of understand that the for-profit healthcare system is this huge misalignment. Tell me a little bit about some of the more pernicious, more common problems. Obviously, the rampant use of prescription drugs, the kind of direct-to-consumer is one issue. What are some other big issues that you see with the healthcare system and just how it's serving? And also, I do want to ask, because I know we have an audience all over the world in 190-something countries, is this a problem that only the U.S. is facing, or are these problems that you're going to tell us about really in a lot of Western healthcare systems as well?
It's in virtually all healthcare systems, though the profit motive is much more powerful in the U.S. As you know, we spend 17.5% of GDP on health care. Most other countries, even with, and by the way, many countries with superior systems to the U.S., we often brag that the U.S. has the best healthcare system in the world. That's not true. That's been widely established by national organizations that the systems in Western Europe, for instance, are superior, dramatically superior with better outcomes than the U.S., even though we spend the most of any developed nation. But this applies everywhere. And the reason for that is healthcare has become this vehicle for greed. that even in Canada, where there's a socialized healthcare system and the government pays for healthcare through taxation of their population. So, for instance, let's say you're a bypass surgeon. You're a thoracic surgeon, you do bypass surgery for coronary disease and heart attacks. Well, in the U.S., you might get paid $5,000 to do one procedure. And so you try to squeeze in 2 a day. In Canada, the government caps your reimbursement for that one procedure. But what it does not do is cap how many you can do. So what you do is you line up 4 a day. So the current systems in Canada, in the UK, and other countries, even though they've taken some steps towards cost containment, have not taken the full step. And the fundamental reason for that is healthcare is still driven largely by greed. I call it the creed of greed. That is, if you allow individual financial profit to be part of the healthcare equation, you're going to sacrifice the health of your patients because of it. And so I think the profit motive has to be separated from the healthcare equation, or else we have too many practitioners, healthcare systems, hospitals, drug companies, medical device companies, et cetera, who profit in large ways. And of course, healthcare has become a global phenomenon so that when you buy drugs or medical devices, you buy it generally from global companies, not from a local company. So this is largely a worldwide problem, but it's the worst in the U.S. And so we spend 17.5% of GDP on healthcare. What you're not told, Jonathan, is that healthcare insiders want it to be 19% or 21%. So what we see as a crippling burden, healthcare costs to Americans, they see as a wealth transfer from your pocket into their pocket. So they secretly and quietly want to grow that number.
Right. I think that's so interesting. I mean, I've heard the recordings of Richard Nixon talking about, hey, these Kaiser guys have a really, really good business going, and we should totally, support this and encourage the laws to follow this because the tax revenue from this is astonishing. And this is like the birth of the modern healthcare issue is Kaiser Permanente and the Nixon administration really realizing like, hey, we got a hell of a moneymaker going on here.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I agree with you that this should be kind of shielded from the greed of capitalism. And I think, though, that that's a really radical idea for many people. Whereas, we would never privatize our, say, protection of the population. We'd never privatize our army. We'd most likely never privatize our police force. And yet many countries privatize their healthcare systems, and not just the US. I mean, you have a public-private situation here in Israel, although I think it works much better. You have similar situations in Singapore and many other kind of wealthy and established industrialized countries. So it's not as radical as people tend to think to make this kind of assumption and idea that, hey, we should probably consider taking the profit motive per se out of healthcare.
I say over the last 50 years, the way the healthcare industry has evolved, sickness is no longer the enemy of the healthcare system. Healthy people are the enemy of the healthcare system.
Wow.
Because if you and I are healthy, we are essentially useless as revenue sources to the healthcare system. And so in response to that, what the healthcare system has done, they've tried to extend their franchise by trying to persuade nice people that in order to maintain health, they will monetize health. They'll tell you that statin drugs are necessary to maintain cardiovascular health and keep you alive. They'll tell you that umpteen blood pressure medicines are necessary, and on, drugs for osteoporosis, all while giving you the diet, by the way, that causes all those diseases. So we know that cut your fat, cut your cholesterol, eat more healthy whole grains, and sugar is not that important. We know that conventional wisdom actually causes autoimmune diseases, heart disease, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, hypertension, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel. So think of it, Jonathan. We're given the diet that causes disease, and then we allow the healthcare system to profit from that mistake. Right. This is a process that goes back over 50 years. So I think given the widespread enlightenment that you and I try to help cultivate, we're all throwing up our hands saying, we've had enough. I no longer subscribe to the U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans. It's nonsense. The USDA food pyramid, food plate is ridiculous. It's more a tool to support agribusiness.
Well said.
The American Heart Association that started out, its first product endorsement was Crisco. And today it's berry kicks and Cocoa Puffs. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a very cozy relationship, very profitable relationship with Coca-Cola. In other words, the people who purport to be our friends and supporters and advocates are nothing but. They are people who are trying to profit from misinformation and from your misfortune. So I say you and I and like-minded people get together, put together our heads, and we live in this age, John, this wonderful age, right, of crowdsourced wisdom, where the tools for collaboration have advanced dramatically, where we can not just podcasts and blogs and social media, but these formal efforts like patientslikeme.com or Cure Together, what I hope my Undoctored.com website becomes, places where all we want is collaboration and truth. We don't want the predatory practices of the healthcare system and websites like the one that starts with web and ends with, you know what it ends with.
Yeah.
Front for the drug industry. We just want the truth. And sometimes, as you know, as the whole, the last campaign in the U.S. showed in the fall, the fake news business, sometimes getting at the truth. It's not always the most straightforward, easy thing, but that's what we're working towards, just getting the truth.
Sure. I love that. I think that's a really, really good intro into kind of Undoctored and why you felt it was necessary. So tell me a little bit about, as you said, what you call going the Undoctored route. How can we, without a medical knowledge, I mean, your average Joe, really hold their own in this conversation of, you know what, I'm not going to eat that diet that you recommend. I'm not going to go on those medications. I mean, doctors hate that kind of patient. So how do we stand a chance?
Well, first I start by encouraging skepticism that your doctor's your pal or your friend. There are good health advocates out there, particularly in the functional medicine, integrative health, et cetera world. But the vast majority of mainstream health practitioners, hospitals, et cetera, are not your friend. It's like calling Walmart your friend. No, Walmart's a business. Healthcare is a business, and they will do everything possible to squeeze the insurance money out of your pocket. So I want people to be very aware of that. It's like going to buy a car or a used car. Don't expect them to be your friend. You're going to have to haggle with them. You're going to have to discuss. You're going to have to challenge them, but never accept anything they tell you at face value because it is bent on profit, not necessarily health. So that's a first important step. Second step is to be aware that you do have astounding power in achieving individual health. Just recognizing that can change the course of your life. The third, I made this mistake some years back, and that is I thought, okay, this is going to be tough. We're going to tell people with rheumatoid arthritis to start this way. We're going to tell people with obesity who need to lose 100 pounds to start this way. We'll tell people with type 2 diabetes and hypertension to start this way. We're going to tell people with coronary disease, lupus, polymyalgia rheumatica, and acid reflux to start this way. In other words, it becomes unmanageable very quickly. So I did something different. Taking it from the wheat belly lessons as they evolved over the years, what I saw was that there were 6 basic strategies. And these are familiar to a lot of people who follow my conversations and a lot of your conversations. That is, no wheat, no grains, cap your sugar intake, cultivate bowel flora, probiotics, prebiotics, vitamin D restoration, iodine supplementation, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil. I'm with that you. Package of 6, there's something odd, Jonathan, about those 6. They have this peculiar and powerful synergy. I call it the 2 + 2 = 11 effect. You put these 6 things together and astounding things happen. And more often than not, hundreds of chronic health conditions reverse. Now, what we can't do, of course, is fix your hip that was busted in a car accident or get rid of dengue fever you got from traveling to South America. We can't address, obviously, infections or injury or genetic disease. But we can affect the hundreds of chronic common health conditions that drive the bulk of healthcare interactions: diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, acid reflux, eczema, psoriasis, etc. Those are the conditions we have extraordinary control over. So what I did was package it together, these 6 strategies, and show people how to do it right. So you and I know that vitamin D, for instance, is crucial. If you rely on your doctor to correct vitamin D, 9 times out of 10, he'll botch it up because he doesn't understand, often doesn't care because it's not providing revenue to his pocket. So we have to be the experts in vitamin D. Iodine. I'll bet you 99% of your listeners never had their doctor talk about iodine to them if they went to its mainstream conventional doctor. Yet iodine is crucial for health, particularly if you live in an inland area away from the ocean. Magnesium, because it's taken out of filtered water, is absent from your drinking water and thereby causes severe magnesium. You correct this handful, just handful, and you'll be impressed with the astounding results. And I show people that also we're on the cusp of this astounding age where healthcare, smartphone apps, collated wisdom, crowd wisdom online, we're getting to the point where we collaborate. You, me, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people collaborate. And you know what happens? The wisdom we extract is superior to the wisdom of any expert. Mm-hmm. Because we draw from thousands of people's backgrounds, experiences, some expert, many not. Yet we get this wonderful distillation of knowledge. And when you ask the questions properly, you often get the answers. Even when John Q primary care doesn't have it, even when the specialist doesn't have it, even when a big tertiary care multi-billion-dollar medical center doesn't have it. But you can often get the answer from the wisdom of crowds. That's evolving, but it's proven to be among the most powerful phenomena of our age.
I love that. I really like that. It's also this N equals 1, that there's just so, not just the wisdom of the crowd that we're all connected, but there's so many people doing tests on themselves that, it's funny, like the listeners of this podcast, if they were to all write in about taking vitamin D supplements, that would be the largest, albeit uncontrolled, but the largest vitamin D study ever. And we're not even a huge podcast. When Tim Ferriss writes in and has a survey done and 1 million or 2 million people respond, that's way bigger than any study is ever going to be. So it's the wisdom of the crowd plus people actually out there with the mindset of my data is relevant and what I'm doing is actually relevant and is actually moving things forward.
Absolutely. Imagine if we start asking questions we don't have an answer to. And we construct the data acquisition process properly, and that's happening, by the way, we can start to test new ideas. And, we can do this for virtually no cost at all. So you don't have to go drum up $300 million to run your own statin drug trial.
Right.
We can do this for almost free, and yet we can extract hugely powerful data and conclusions from these experiments, and that's happening. So I hope what happened to Kodak. Remember the story of Kodak?
Oh, yeah.
Kodak gets out of cameras, and you had to take your film to the drugstore and pay $18 to get your 20 roll of 20 photos processed, third of which weren't even good. Well, Kodak invented digital photography and then scrapped it and kept it a secret because they didn't want it to ruin their conventional business. Well, you know what happened, of course? Digital photography was invented on the outside. Kodak went under. I want to see that kind of process happen to a large segment of healthcare. I want to see this predatory system shrink down to its essentials. That is, a system to provide catastrophic care, attend to injuries, infections when they occur, maybe genetic diseases, and get the heck out of the business of trying to squeeze us for chronic health conditions that do not require drugs to maintain health.
I couldn't agree more. I do want to ask you, we talked a little bit about supplementation, and it's kind of on my mind right now. I went to an osteopath, and we were talking about like this returning problem that I have in a certain area of my spine, certain area of my back. And that's kind of irrelevant for the point. But what he was telling me is that's associated with liver function. And he said to me, he's like, well, how much alcohol do you drink? I said, I haven't had a drink in 2 years. And he goes, oh, do you take a lot of supplements? So, we talked about vitamin D. We talked about fish oil. We talked about probiotics. That's already 3 pills a day. Plus, I'm sure, a good multivitamin to make up for years of magnesium not being in your water, so on and so forth. You're talking 3-4 pills. What's your thinking on supplementation and liver function, and how do we, kind of bring up these nutrient levels without overloading our liver the way that a few beers a day would?
Well, those supplements have almost nothing to do with liver function. So I'm puzzled by this idea that you're stressing your liver. You got to do a lot to stress your liver. Liver is a pretty hardy organ. I mean, if you drank a fifth of bourbon a day, that would do it. But vitamin D has virtually no challenging liver toxic effects. It's not processed by the liver like that. Fish oil is processed by the liver, but that's not a burden. That's, we were talking about a few grams of fat, which is only as minor compared, say, to the fat in a steak. So I'm a little bit puzzled by this being a challenge to your liver. I don't think that's true.
Okay, that's good to know.
I'd say what does challenge your liver besides alcohol are carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have this world of people with so-called fatty liver. an unfortunate name because what it represents is the accumulation of fat that you see on an MRI or CT scan of the liver, but it has nothing to do with fat intake. That has to do with grain intake and sugar intake, and that's via the process called de novo lipogenesis, the conversion of hydrates, like the amylopectins of grains, into triglycerides that raise blood triglycerides that lead to heart disease, diabetes, etc., but also many of which accumulate in the liver. So that's stressful to the liver. So the basic nutrients like magnesium is not really processed by the liver. So I'm a little puzzled by that. So
okay.
why lose any sleep over challenging your liver with the supplements?
I'm really glad to hear that.
I will tell you this also. I classify supplements, Jonathan, into two. This is how I think about them. I classify them into two general categories. Supplements that address intrinsic human need. That is, needs we all developed over the millennia that we've adapted to on this life on this planet. Then there are supplements that don't address intrinsic human need. You really don't need them. They can still provide modest benefits, but you'll find that the benefits of supplements that address intrinsic human need are often life-changing, huge, and can free you of diseases, medication need, etc. The ones that fall outside of intrinsic human need tend to have, at best, modest effects, if any effect at all. And that would be something like, say, ashwagandha. Yeah, you can have positive effects, but it's so minor as to be hardly worth it. But the benefits, say, of vitamin D are life-changing. Now, vitamin D thrown on top of grain elimination is 10 times more powerful. So the supplements we take that address intrinsic human need provide huge benefits. So there's really not a downside, provided there's no undesirable ingredients in that capsule. If there's something undesirable, say like cornstarch, then you could have an adverse effect from your supplement. But provided there's nothing like that in your supplement, you're picking clean supplements, you're fine. There should be no concerns about challenging any organ.
Love it. Okay, I'm really glad to hear that. I had to check it. Let me ask you this, on that note of kind of where we get our information. Medical information, as you said, the site that starts with a web and ends with an MD, it's hard to find reliable medical information, I think. And, we try to have reliable guests on the show who are sharing really valuable information, such as yourself. But I think for the average person, they don't really know who to trust. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, where can we really get this information that arms us with enough and information of high enough quality so that we can go to our doctor and be like, you know what? No.
Well, I think that's still evolving. We're not that far into the information age, so I don't have all the rules sorted out in my own head, but I think there's some basic rules. If there's an ad for a drug or drugs, leave. That clearly is not a site that's going to try to give you objective health information. They're trying to sell you drugs, and they're trying to please their advertisers. If there's an advertisement for a hospital system or procedures like their new electrophysiologic program that implants implantable defibrillators, or their new cancer program, or their new gamma knife program for brain cancer, if there's anything like that, run. Because that system is trying to turn you into a profit center. So always be mindful who's, for instance, in the world of, if you're going to read studies, like on PubMed.org, that's the repository of information for the National Library of Medicine, which all your listeners may already know about, but should know about, PubMed.org. If the study was paid for by Merck, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, etc., or a device manufacturer like Medtronic, throw it away. Ignore it. It's like if Ford claimed they make the best car in America, and you ask the salesman why he says that, he says, well, we published a study. And you ask who paid for it, and they said, Ford. Ford's a fine car. I'm not picking on Ford. But you and I know that in the world of products, never pay attention to those kinds of ridiculous studies paid for by the manufacturer. Then why are practice guidelines, and almost all of my colleagues, they put as much weight or more on company industry-sponsored studies as they do on non-industry sponsored studies. And by the way, the $2 billion plus spent on statin drug research, almost all of it was paid for by the statin drug industry. So guess what my colleagues all tell you? They tell you statin drugs are wonder drugs, they save lives, and there's hardly any benefit whatsoever with statin drugs because they mistook marketing for clinical research and clinical practice guidelines. So always be mindful of who's paying for the information to be placed in front of you. And then develop your trusted sources, your podcast. People like Rob Wolf, a friend of mine who's in the paleo world. While I have some differences in paleo, Rob's a smart guy, and he's a great source of wisdom. Josh Axe is in the natural health world. He's a good guy, and he's trying to do a good job delivering good information. There are people out there who over time, there's one of my favorites is a young lady who I don't know personally, who runs a website called Stop the Thyroid Madness. And she's done an extraordinary job in pulling back the curtain on the nonsense that passes for thyroid health and how to get it done for real. So you'll develop these trusted sources over time. And there's, like, I know you, you know me, we know Rob Wolf, we get to know each other and we form this community. I'm hoping at some point there's a way to collaborate more formally so that John Q. Public can say, I'm new to this, where do I go first? And where I cut through all the nonsense, I don't have 3 years to educate myself and get acquainted with these people. So I don't have a site like that or a place to go that does it all for you yet. But I'm going to bet you, Jonathan, that's on the horizon.
Right. We had Kamal Patel of examine.com. I think they're doing a really good job, like not specifically going into advice, but just auditing every different kind of supplement and substance out there and saying like, look, from a trained perspective, this is what this study says, and this is which studies you should be listening to and which ones you shouldn't. I think that's a very interesting mission.
Excellent. That's excellent.
So I imagine you're anticipating a lot of backlash from the medical community. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that one.
Well, I'll tell you, like with Wheat Belly, it's not as much as you think, only because most of my colleagues are more interested in growing their bottom line with procedures and other activities and don't pay any attention to the conversations we have. So most don't really. Wow. The only reason why they often get involved is this is what happens. John Q. Primary Care has somebody comes to their office and they say, well, what happened to you? You look terrific. You must be taking the drugs I gave you. And they say, no, I stopped them all. I lost 47 pounds. I feel better. I look better because I, for instance, got rid of all wheat and grains and I'm taking vitamin D, et cetera. And the doctor says, oh, okay, fine. 5 more people do the same thing in front of him. That's when the doctors start to say, I thought it was stupid. I thought nutrition was nonsense. Didn't do anything for anybody. I'm starting to realize what I was doing was wrong. And those are the doctors the ones who actually are willing to learn some lessons from their patients are the ones proven to be advocates. But there, as you point out, there will be the staunch adherents to conventional wisdom, the low-fat people. The doctor is the paternalistic, do what I say kind of practitioner. That's probably half. You know, those people have to die before we get rid of them. They're not going to change their minds. So I saw this happen. I had a professor of nutrition at a major university start to incorporate some of these new ideas. She delivered her standard curriculum. This is a major university, by the way. She delivered her standard curriculum to her dietitian students. But then towards the end of her semester, started to say, let's talk about some of the more modern, more popular ideas. Let's talk about Atkins and South Beach and Wheat Belly and grains and gluten-free. She got fired.
No way.
Because her department chair and some of the powers in her department pretty much said, I based an entire career on this message of cut your fat, Coca-Cola is okay, healthy whole grains, and how dare you usurp the basis of my entire career, you're fired. So there are going to be people like that who are not going to change. You know, if you've been saying this for 30 years, it's not like they're going to change course rapidly. So this sounds harsh, but those people their careers have to come to a close. And people with new ideas who are willing to embrace the truth, read the new science, those people have to start taking center stage. So this is a process not going to happen by next Tuesday, of course, or next month or next year. It's a process, even though information is exchanged in milliseconds, the human mind doesn't change and habit doesn't change in milliseconds. It takes decades and careers and generations. So I wouldn't be surprised you and I had a similar conversation and claim some progress another 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Right. It reminds me a lot of like the medical marijuana and now, you know, getting into different psychedelic drugs and stuff like that. It's like we've known for decades that marijuana is really effective for pain management and, you know, a million other things. But it's just, you know, until certain people leave office and kind of the new generation's ushered in, that it's just so hard to make change. And only now people who, you know, are suffering from glaucoma or are suffering from all kinds of muscular dystrophy are finally now able to access medication that grows in the ground that has previously been illegal to them.
Yes. How do we tell an ophthalmologist who makes $2.5 million a year by treating cataracts and other common conditions typically caused by nutrient deficiencies in diet? How do we tell them what you really should be doing, spending your time, is not injecting people in the eye and taking out their lenses for cataract. You should spend your entire time counseling people on how not to have those conditions. Do you think we'll have any impact on that guy? Yeah. No, because I know them. I can tell you.
Right.
They have their 550 Mercedes and their $2 million house they have to pay for, and they're not going to give their $2.5 million income in order to help people be healthy. So let them do their thing, but don't be persuaded that they're your friend and they're trying to do you some good. They're not. They're trying to make money off of you. So I think that's part of our mission, is to pull back the curtain on healthcare and expose it for what it is, and start the process of educating people that health really is achievable. And a lot of it's not that difficult. It's pretty easy, in fact. And it's uncommon to have a lot of health conditions if you take on some of these basic strategies.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this on the topic of kind of information evolving and opinions changing over time. One of the things I found so interesting when we had Rob on the show very recently, actually like a few weeks ago, was just how his opinions have evolved and changed. And I think that's really the mark. A lot of people would look at that as like, well, maybe he got it wrong the first time. I look at it as someone who's continuing to do the research, science being the ever evolving creature that it is, and someone who's saying, like, my ego aside, I got this one piece wrong and I had to change and update. And he's really hard on himself, as I'm sure you know. He beats himself up about, well, I thought paleo was a one size fits all and so on and so forth. But I found one of the most interesting things to be the things that he'd amended, the opinions that had been updated and changed. So I wanted to ask you, since Wheat Belly was written in 2011, how have your thoughts and opinions expanded or changed? Or what are some things that you now believe that you didn't believe back then?
Well, the first one, like we talked about, that all grains are problems. For instance, people with celiac disease who are told to be gluten-free are often told to eat gluten-free foods. What they're not told, for instance, is that the cornstarch in gluten-free foods reactivates celiac disease. Even though it's cornstarch, not corn protein, since proteins that activate celiac disease, it's contaminated by corn protein. So it's very common for a person with celiac disease to go gluten-free and still have their disease persist or not go away entirely. So it became clear that grains as a class of plant had no place in the human diet. It's also clear that all modern people have varying levels of dysbiosis, disruptions of bowel flora, and that probably nobody has escaped this. And this is because we've all taken antibiotics at one time or another, are exposed to herbicide, pesticide residues in non-organic foods, drinking water, air, and are subject to so many other disruptors of bowel flora, chlorinated drinking water. And so we all have to make this concerted effort to restore bowel flora. Not that anybody really knows what ideal bowel flora looks like, because if it looks like what the Hadza or the Matsas look like, the people who are true hunter-gatherers in the world, we got a long way to go to re-achieve normal bowel flora. But no one really knows just how far we have to take that. But it's become clearer that bowel flora is one of these extraordinary gifts, this insight that if we get it right, we will be rewarded with astounding levels of high functioning, freedom from emotional issues like anxiety, deeper sleep, and correction of metabolic distortions like high triglycerides, high blood pressure, and high insulin. So that's something that's become front and center in my conversation, my thinking, this effort to restore bowel flora, an evolving conversation. It's also become clear that of the 6, there's more to health than those 6 basic strategies. But those 6 basic strategies are so powerful that even if you start with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or type 2 diabetes or obesity, whatever, more often than not, you'll have none of those conditions at the end of just a few weeks or months of incorporating these 6 basic strategies. Mm-hmm. There will be people. Let's say someone has calcium oxalate kidney stones. There's about 2 additional strategies you should know about that help you not have calcium oxalate kidney stones and have painful stones being passed that impair kidney function. So there are some conditions that require additional efforts, but for the most part, the vast majority of chronic conditions go away if people engage in each and every one. Because I get this all the time. I like vitamin D and not eating wheat and grains, but I didn't think bowel flora issues were that important. And magnesium is kind of a pain. I didn't understand, so I didn't do it. And iodine, I didn't do that either. And what they get is they get a partial response, but they don't go all the full distance. So you got to do all those basic 6 things, and you'll be well on your way.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, we really like to assign homework on the show, as you probably remember. So why don't we give people the first piece of homework, while they're waiting for their copy of Undoctored to come in the mail or be downloaded to their Kindle or whatever it is. What's the first piece of homework we should all do? I mean, the first thing we're all going to do this week to take charge of our own health in this conversation.
Open your eyes and ears to what you're being told through direct-to-consumer drug advertising, the advice of your doctor or dietitian, or the ads on TV or billboards from hospitals. Recognize that healthcare has nothing to do with health, and that the enemy of healthcare is not sickness, it's healthy people. So if you become healthy, your doctor has no idea what to do with you because he can't improve on your health. He can try to persuade you that your total cholesterol is a little high and you need a statin drug, but start to question everything they tell you, because it has nothing to do with health. More often than not, it has to do with profiting from you. And start thinking about things you can do, because health should be free, I believe, Jonathan. It should be like freedom of speech. If I said, Jonathan, the U.S. government is going to charge you $10,000 a year for your family to maintain freedom of speech, you'd be outraged, rightly so. But that's what they've done with health. They're going to charge you many thousands of dollars every year just to be healthy. Well, that's ridiculous. You can be healthy for free. You can be healthy just given a handful of basic tools. So I want people to start to open their eyes to this idea that healthcare is your friend. It's not your friend.
I love it. I really, really like that. So we covered a lot of it. We covered a lot here. So I guess we'll start to wrap it up here. I do want to ask you, are there any other, we talked about vitamin D, we talked about questioning information, we talked about obviously the wheat stuff. Are there any other kind of small side skills, habits, or routines that you feel can help people perform at a higher level?
Really take the diet to heart.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing, for instance, triathletes, marathon runners, other elite athletes, who've been carb loading, thinking that big plate of pasta the night before the race and chugging those energy drinks and bars and then having to stop in the porta potty to empty their bowels of diarrhea. They all thought that was a necessary process. Well, of course, all of it's nonsense. It was based on misinterpretations of studies that date back to the 1930s and onwards that told us that you need carbs for functioning. It's not true. Now, here's the problem. If you go grain-free and limit your carb exposure, like we do, to 15 grams net carbs per meal, there will be a decrease in performance that lasts 6 weeks. And that's the delayed conversion of relying on carbohydrates and glycogen in the liver to being able to mobilize fat efficiently. But if you endure that obligatory 6-week period of decreased performance, you'll come out of it with heightened performance. Tennis players are better and faster. Triathletes can abbreviate their times and not have diarrhea along the route. So really taking the diet seriously really pays off. There's more to it. You got to cultivate bowel flora, for instance, particularly if you limit carbohydrates. But you can achieve a ton by embracing the diet. The diet that overlaps greatly with paleo and Atkins and low carb. There's some differences, but more or less 90% the same. You can achieve dramatic effects just by doing that.
Incredible. Well, so, all right, Dr. Davis, I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people go ahead and learn more about you? Obviously, we're going to link to the new book, Undoctored, on the blog post, but where else can we send folks?
The book Undoctored doesn't get released till May 9th, 2017. There's a website, undoctored.com, that will release a little before that, and all the social media is just getting underway now. So until that happens, all the Wheat Belly online conversations remain relevant. So the wheatbellyblog.com, the official Wheat Belly Facebook page. We have a private Facebook page for the Wheat Belly 10-day grain detox. So those are the primary properties that still carry on the Wheat Belly message that is now transitioning to the Undoctored discussions that will begin around May 2017.
Fantastic. And this episode will come out on May 9th. So by the time you guys are hearing this, the book is already available.
Perfect.
Awesome. So, Dr. Davis, I just want to end on our last note, which is if people take away really one message from this episode and carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
Eat no grains. There's more to health, but eat no grains.
Love it. Dr. Davis, I want to thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, and I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well, and I want to wish you a lot of luck with the new book.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, you take care.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.